Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. This is episode 259 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. Welcome, and today we're going to be talking about an important passion area for me, which is reflective practice. More specifically, why leaders should have a reflective practice and how to start one if you don't have one already. So let's get into this important topic right now. When I deliver training for leaders, I often ask them whether they engage in some sort of reflective practice. That is, taking time to reflect on their experiences and thoughts at some point during the busy working week. Now, in most cases, I find that very few people say that they have a reflective practice, which I find a little surprising because reflection can have many benefits, which I think often not well known. So in this episode, I'm going to outline some of the key benefits of reflection and then take a look at what sort of things you might do to reflect in your role. And it's not rocket science. It doesn't have to take hours. So we'll look at some of those solutions. So what is a reflective practice anyway? Well, a reflective practice is any method you have for taking time to reflect on your thoughts, feelings, and situations you have experienced. I start to call it a practice when it becomes a standard part of your routine rather than just ad hoc thinking. For example, if you take 10 minutes at the end of each week to reflect on the good and bad parts of your week, you could call this a practice. Engaging in regular coaching, mentoring, or therapy can be reflective practices too, because the coach, mentor, or therapist will ask you questions to help you reflect on your experiences. Now, some leaders have told me that they pray regularly, which helps them to reflect too. So taking time to think privately or engaging in gratitude journaling are also other methods which leaders use. So there's no one-size-fits-all approach here. The most important thing is to start and to have something that works well for you. And I'll put a link in the show notes page to gratitude journaling and what that's about, because that can be a nice way to get started as well. And the show notes page for today is thoughtfulleader.com/259. So why doesn't everyone reflect regularly? Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I recently surveyed my Thoughtful Leader audience to ask about how they reflect. Now, unsurprisingly, many of the thoughtful leaders in the survey responded that they do reflect regularly, and I wasn't so surprised here because it's called Thoughtful Leader Podcast, and obviously thoughtful leaders think a lot. But there were quite a few people who responded that while they try to engage in reflection, they sometimes struggle for several reasons. The first one is not enough time. With a busy schedule, it can be difficult to try to squeeze in the time for reflection. The second thing I noticed from the responses to the survey were it's a little bit intangible. When you reflect, things don't change overnight, so it can be hard to notice the benefits. The third thing that held back leaders from reflecting is not knowing how to do it. Some leaders indicated that they don't really know how they should go about reflecting. And the last one that really was a common theme was not taking action on it. Sometimes people reflect but fail to take accountability for any action off the back of it, or they get busy and they forget. This means reflection may appear to have little benefit. And some of these reasons may sound familiar to you, and I think they're understandable. Now, I find that reflection often happens in organizations as part of lessons learned or review sessions at the end of projects or during their delivery, or maybe a team focuses on how is our team working well together. However, I find these are usually focused on the delivery of the work in a team rather than on personal self-reflection. And there's a related post I would recommend you reading called Want to Show Confidence? Start by Noticing. Now, noticing stuff during your workday can be a good way to start reflecting. You can check out that blog post in the show notes page, thoughtfulleader.com/259. Okay, so what are the benefits of having a reflective practice? Well, from a personal standpoint, I'm quite an introspective person by nature. I like to think through what has happened and prepare for what's coming. It helps me to feel more confident and process events, and often I find that it helps to gain a little bit of understanding about how I deal with things. Then, the next time something happens that's similar, I can do something different and hopefully get a better outcome. However, that's my own personal experience, but there's a bunch of research out there stretching back a few years that also supports the benefits of reflection. And I'll put the links in the show notes as well to several of these papers that you can read if you're interested in the research. So the first one is that reflection can improve performance by allowing people to draw lessons from their past experiences. Reflection can also help people take personal responsibility for their past performance, and it can also help people feel more confident about achieving their goals. Now, from a well-being perspective, a reflective practice can also help people positively reframe their work situation, recover from work stress, and perceive work as being more meaningful. So even though when you're reflecting, you're actually doing something, which is thinking, I find that reflection still acts as a break from the normal work grind, and we know that taking breaks is good for us. So why not use your breaks for reflection? So now let's take a look at how you might start your own reflective practice. And if you're anything like me, you'll often hear experts tell you that you just need to do something good for 5 minutes a day. You should stretch for 5 minutes a day or whatever it is. Now, I hear this a lot, and the problem is that if you do 20 recommended good things for you for 5 minutes per day, you need 100 minutes. So here, I'll also take a look at how you might overcome this challenge and start forming a good habit so you can reflect regularly without it seeming like a struggle. So the first thing I'd recommend the first step is to book time in your calendar. Even if it's only 10 minutes, I strongly recommend booking time out in your calendar on a frequent basis for reflection. This could be just once or a few times per week, but be sure to be consistent with it. A recurring calendar invite can be useful for this purpose to make sure you don't forget. So if you can adjourn to a quiet location to reflect by yourself, then this is even better, because it can be hard to collect your thoughts in a busy workplace with people all around you. The second thing is to consider the cue and the reward when creating your reflective practice. So ideally, you want to make a habit of your reflection, and that's why it's useful to consider some of the work of Charles Duhigg, a prominent habit expert, and I'll put a link to his work in the show notes page as well. Now, he says that the natural habit process has a cue, a routine, and a reward. The cue is what kicks off the habit. In this case, we might use your recurring calendar booking as the cue. For example, when the calendar booking notification appears, I'll stop what I'm doing and go to my quiet reflection place. Now, the routine is the meaty part of the habit. Your routine would be the reflective practice itself. And lastly, we need to consider the reward. The reward is something you enjoy that you can give yourself after executing the routine. For example, you might say, after I do my reflection, I'll have a cup of coffee. And a leader I worked with recently had a routine where she actually combined the reflection with having a coffee in a cafe, and she found that really beneficial and relaxing for her to de-stress and disconnect a little bit. So the reward needs to be something you enjoy, otherwise you won't really look forward to it. And the idea over time is that eventually you won't need the reward so much because you'll enjoy the routine itself. And that's when you know you've developed a habit. And there's another episode, number 204, about creating better leadership habits. I'd recommend you check that one out as well. Now, when you're creating your reflective practice, you should also have some standard questions to answer. I find it easiest to reflect based on a series of questions that I ask myself. And rather than make them up each time, you should develop your own standard set that you like. This means you can get straight into reflecting rather than have to think about what you'll do. So here are some examples. You could say, what went well this week? What specifically was good about it? How did it make you feel? What didn't go well? What specifically was bad about it? How did you contribute to the situation? And that could be whether it's a good or bad situation. And then what would you do differently next time? Or another alternative to that one is, what would you do next time to make sure that the good thing happens again? Now, these sort of questions are just a starting point, and you can choose any that you find useful. Even if you have 3 to 5 questions, that can be enough to develop a regular reflection routine. The next thing I think is very useful is to handwrite your reflection answers. Now, I've always found that handwriting is more effective than typing on a computer or a smartphone. When I was studying, I would often rewrite all my lecture notes as part of the study process. Now, this did take a long time, but I found that the knowledge stuck more with me than just by reading it or typing it. There is something in the physical act of writing that helps us to retain information and learn more effectively, and I'll put a link to that, an article on that in the show notes page. There's something about the mind-body connection which is reinforced by writing. And I've also noticed that writing slows you down. You might notice that you can type on your phone or your laptop really fast because you've become very good at typing. But writing is noticeably slower, and it helps us to slow down during our reflection period. So instead of typing on your laptop, where there are also many distractions waiting to happen, consider buying a paper or digital notebook where you write by hand. And the one thing about buying a paper notebook I've found is that if you buy one that you really like the look of and you like the paper and all that sort of good stuff, it can actually be a nice thing to be able to use that journal or that notebook. So that's another thing to think about as well. Another thing I'd recommend is to reflect on positive and negative events. Now, I find that I tend to focus on negative events most often when I reflect because they have the strongest emotional impact for me. Negative events also help us to identify what we can fix for next time so we can avoid future problems. But there are some studies that indicate that performance improves when we focus on failures and successes rather than just failures. So try to split your reflection time accordingly on both positive and negative events. And when you're reflecting on a positive event, think about how you contributed to that positive outcome and how you could do it again next time so you can get a good outcome the next time something similar happens as well. So we don't just want to be doom and gloom and reflect on bad things, although that is a good way to reflect as well. Now, the next aspect is you should think of an action to take. Now, one aspect of reflection that I think is sometimes missed is the practical side of things. Instead of just reflecting on how you feel, consider what you could do in a similar situation next time. If something great happened, could you take an action to make it happen again? If something bad happened, could you take an action to avoid it happening next time? Now, without this practical application, I find that a reflective practice can sometimes seem a little bit intangible, but when the outcome is to take a concrete action, you can start to see the benefits that the reflection is having. So reflection has a bunch of benefits and is a low-cost activity, so why not start today? All you need is some paper and a pen. And at the time of this episode, I've almost fully released the Useful Thinking Journal, which is a paper journal I've created to help people start their own reflective practice. Now, the journal incorporates several research-based techniques to get the most out of your reflective practice so you can get better every week. I will be releasing more information when the journal is out and ready for you to get, so stay tuned. But in the meantime, book yourself some reflection time in your calendar and simply get started. So, do you have a reflective practice? What is it? Tell me and the other Thoughtful Leaders about it in the comments on the show notes page, thoughtfulleader.com/259. I would love to hear what you think about this and what's your reflective practice, or why don't you do it? Your input is appreciated. And if you haven't already and you like this podcast, please consider leaving a positive review on your podcast app of choice. It really helps me get the word out. And share the good word of thoughtful leadership, and hopefully we can get more people leading thoughtfully in our organizations. Okay, thanks for listening. I'll be back next time.